Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, the honorable lecturers, Sir Gatot Yohanes Tapa, and all of my beloved friends. So, thank you for the opportunity. Today, I and my groups will present our presentation. The title is The Types of Qualitative Research. So, my group members consist of myself, Ria Julita, and my friend.
My name is Jessika Theresia Nova.
My name is Grecy.
All right. Without wasting our time, let's get started to the first presentation. So the first presenter will present by Jessika. So Jessika, time is yours.
All right, thank you, Ria. So the table of content of our presentation consists of 5 parts. The first is ethnography research. The second is narrative research. The third is grounded theory. The fourth is case theory. And the next slide. The last part is phenomenology. Okay. So the next slide. So we will discuss about the ethnography research. As you could see on the screen, ethnography research is a research method used to learn about the lives of others. It helps us to understand how and why people behave differently in various societies or cultures. Ethnographic research is the process of collecting data about a group of people. The next slide, please. So we move to the next part is the ethnography research, and we found the title of research of our ethnography research. That is the advantage of introducing culture through social media. We found 3 references that you could see on the screen, or you could find the knowledge from here. So the next slide. The next slide is about steps to conduct data. At the first is problem formulations. Problem formulations, defining the main focus of the study by formulating the problem about which you want to learn more. The next is selecting a research setting. The first question is knowing and deciding where to begin. The setting should permit clear observations. It is also helpful to select a setting that you could readily fit in, but this does not mean that you are immediately familiar with it. The next is gaining access. How do you get into a group that you wish to study? You may need to seek formal permission, which can be facilitated if you have a friend who can vouch for you. You can also get your foot in the door if you first participate in the group as a volunteer and not as a researcher. The fourth is presenting oneself. You need to decide how you will present yourself to those in the field. Will you be conducting covert research? What roles will you need to adopt and relate to others? How active will you be participating in other people's lives? And if you present yourself as a researcher, will others be able to accept you in their daily lives? And the last is gathering and recording informations. Gathering and recording information, sometimes it can be difficult to record and gather data at the same time. What are the types of information that should be recorded or taken as field notes? If you cannot fully record your observations while you are in the field, what should you do? Always carry a notepad for brief jottings. Sometimes there is no alternative but to wait and record observations after you leave the setting. You should record the observation as soon as possible to minimize the recall problems. You may also rely on equipment such as audio recorders, video cameras, or etc. The next slide. The next slide is about techniques of collecting the data and how. The first, observation. Participant observation is unique in that it combines the researchers' participations in the lives of the people under study while also maintaining a professional distance. According to Agrosino, 2007, Observation is the fact of perceiving the activities in an interrelationship of people in the field setting. The next is interviewing. Interviewing is the process of directing a conversation to collect information. The last is archival research. This is the analysis of existing materials stored for research, surveys, or other purpose officially and unofficially. The next slide, please. Technique of data analysis. First, we have coding for descriptive labels. Since the materials collected are in the form of written words, those words must first be grouped into meaningful categories or descriptive labels, then organized to compare, contrast, and identify patterns. First level coding is done to reduce the data to a manageable size. Before one begins the coding process, it may be helpful to formulate basic domains that categorize a broad range of phenomena. For example, setting, types of activities, events, relationships, and social structure, general perspective, strategies, process, meanings, and repeated phrases. The next or the second is sorting for patterns. The next step is to sort of or group the descriptive labels into smaller sets. One begins to develop themes from those groupings and a sense of possible connection between the informations. The third is identifying outliers. Cases, situations, events, or settings that do not fit with the rest of the findings may be identified. These cases should be kept in mind as the different steps in the research process are developed. For example, should we collect more information about those cases? And the fourth, or the next slide. The next slide is the continue or the technique of data analysis. The fourth is generalizing constructs and theories. The patterns or connected findings are related all to the theories in order to make sense of the rich and complex data collected. Existing literature is also reviewed. The fifth is memoing with reflective remarks. Memos are insights or ideas that one has about data. They are written so that the researchers can know if anything needs further clarification or testing. It also helps the researcher to keep track of their assumptions, biases, and opinions throughout the whole research process. The next slide.
Right, wait a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
The technique of drawing the conclusions. This is the last part of our ethnography research. So a good conclusions for an ethnographic paper will do these things. The first is conclude the argument presented in your thesis statement. The next is give some context for how your study fits into the larger body of the research on the topic. The third, be written clearly and directly with no jargon. It means the language should be accessible to a non-specialist audience. All right, the next slide. The next slide is about the narrative research. Narrative research is part of human science that describes the process of collecting and analyzing stories people are telling about their experience. Moreover, this qualitative analysis helps to interpret the collected narrative data. Next slide. We found the title of our narrative research is about learning English through visual media. And we found some references that could improve our knowledge about the topics. And then next slide, please. The first is steps to conduct data. At the first, identify a problem or phenomenon to explore. Identifying an issue or concern provides the purpose for a study and enables the researcher to understand personal or social experience for an individuals. The next slide is select one or more participants to study. Many narrative studies examine only one individual, but several individuals may be studied as well. So select an individual or more who can provide an understanding of the issue. Carefully select these participations because based on their experience, it must be hard to find. So the next is collect the story from the participant. Besides the participant for verbally sharing their story through conversations or interview, field texts also provide information about the participant. Examples include journal or diary entries, letters sent by the individual, photograph, memory boxes, and stories acquired through friends or family members. The next step is restory or retell the individual story. This step involves examining the raw data, identifying key elements, organizing and sequencing these elements, and then retelling a story that describes the individual's experience. Restoring helps the reader to understand the story by sequencing it in a logical order. Stories commonly include the following elements, such as setting, character, problems, actions, and resolutions. The 5th step is collaborate the participant or storyteller. Throughout the narrative story collection process, the researcher works with the storyteller to ensure the participants' experience are accurately portrayed. The next step is write a story about participants' experience. Usually the biggest step in narrative research, the participants' life experience are written into a story, but by the researchers, sorry. So highlighting the specific themes that emerge throughout the story and involving sections about the importance of narrative research can be helpful to the readers. Next step is validate the report's accuracy. An accurate report is essential to perceiving the story. Conferring with individuals and searching for disconfirming evidence will protect the story's credibility. The next slide, please. The next slide is about techniques of collecting the data and how. The first is interview. Interview is central to narrative research. In my case, it creates opportunities to pause and reflect with participants about what they remembered, valued, liked, and disliked, about what their involvement in habitat restorations. Among other things, interviewing allowed participants to make explicit certain feelings, beliefs, and opinion which might otherwise have been left unsaid and or passed unnoticed. The next is informal observations. The great value of this method was the sense of continuity and embodied intimacy for which it allowed. And when choosing the research, we were looking not for an average of typical or representative, but rather program congruent with the desire to investigate the potential of school-based habitat restorations. Where and how might a particular program disturb dominant human-centered social narratives and foster a life sense of being in more than human world? The next is surveys. Surveys to get sense of how the stories which emerge were set within a wider web of school-based habitat restoration investigate. As example, we can try to conduct a survey for all schools within the same southern and where restoration project were going. And the survey represented a means of looking beyond a particular case to consider other programs and to identify idiosyncrasies and shared storylines. The fourth is conversation. Conversations analysis is a specific form of investigations or inquiry. A conversation refers two or more individuals talking with one another just for the sake of talking. So it is a form of sociability and reflects an individual's ability and willingness to interact with others. At the basic level, conversation analysis is viewed as the study of talk. In broad sense, conversation analysis could refer to the study of people talking together. Oral communications or even study of language use. Next is journals. Journals could be the one of sources of the data or of narrative research. We could able to research or search through websites, libraries, and many more. Next slide, please.
All right, wait a minute.
Okay. Okay, the technique of data analysis of narrative research. First is the data should be collected in the form of interviews transcripts. The next is key direct quotes should be identified and common ideas should be paraphrased. The next is related patterns should be combined into teams. Fourth is making a trustworthy and reliable arguments. It means to the selections of themes for analysis and creating storyline which would help your readers to realize the process, motivations, and understanding of your research. Next slide, please. So this is the last part of narrative research, is the technique of drawing the conclusions. At the first, it should have a clear introductions. The second is an opening paragraph that presents the topic of the writing. The next is then you wrote the body, which has all your supporting details and ideas, and never end your essay with the body. Always include a conclusion which concludes or ends the text. Okay, I think that's all from my material. Should be continued by my friends, Ria Julita or Grecy.
All right, thank you, Jessika, for the opportunity. So let's move to the next types of research, phenomenology research. So what is phenomenology research? Phenomenology research is a research that focuses on the commonality of a lived experience within a particular group. So our group found the title of this research is about life experience of people living with HIV or AIDS who receive discriminatory treatment in society. So you can see 5 references in here. Next. So what are the steps to conducting data from phenomenology research? First is discovering a topic and question. Discovering a topic and questions root in autobiographical meanings and values, as well as involving social meanings and significance. And next, you can conducting a comprehensive review. Conducting a comprehensive review of the professional and research literature. So in my case, it's about discrimination for people with human immunodeficiency or AIDS. So I should review a research about discriminatory behavior of society towards human immunovirus or AIDS sufferers. And next is constructing a set of criteria. Constructing a set of criteria to locate appropriate co-researchers. And the next is providing co-researchers. Providing co-researchers with instruction on the nature and purpose of the investigation. For example, in my case, my purpose is to know about life experience of people with AIDS who receive discriminatory and developing an agreement that includes obtaining informed consent and then ensure confidentiality and delineating the responsibility of the primary researcher and the research participant, and last, consistent with ethical principle of research. And next, to conducting data, we can developing a set of questions. Developing a set of questions or topics to guide the interview process. And the next, conducting a recording of a lengthy interview. Conducting and recording a lengthy person-to-person interview that focus on the bracket, topic, and question. A follow-up interview may also be needed. And the last is organizing and analyzing the data to facilitate development of individual textual and structural descriptions, and then a composite textual description and a composite structural description and a synthesis of textual and structural meanings and essence technique of data analysis. And then what is the technique of collecting the data and how to collecting the data in this research? First is non-participant observation. What is meaning? So non-participant observation conducted by researchers in many times in order to obtain data on the activities of human immunovirus or AIDS in order to obtain an understanding or a means of providing to information and to obtain previously. And in this study, researchers look at the activity and look at the discriminatory that the society do in someone who experience a human immunovirus. And then we can do deep interview. The interview is a conversation with a specific purpose that is done by both parties, that the interviewers as a researchers with the informant interviewers associate life experience for people with human immunovirus and who are discriminated against. So interviews were conducted in this study is unstructured interviews or in-depth interviews were conducted with a question that is open and lead to the depth of information and done in a way that is not formally structured in order to explore the views of the study's subjects about many things that are beneficial to the basis of extracting information in more distance and deep. And last, you can collecting the documents and records. According to Guba and Lincoln, documents and records are two different things. A record is any written statement drawn up by a person or intuition for the purpose of testing an event or presenting accounting, while the document is any written material or movies about discrimination of people with HIV/AIDS, for example, who are discriminated against. In this study, using documents and records on the ground about a sort of stable, reach, and push so that it can be useful as evidence testing and in accordance with qualitative research because it is natural according to the context and was born and is in the context. And then next, what about the technique of data analysis? The first, you can reading and rereading. Reading and rereading the participants' descriptions of the phenomenon to acquire a feeling for their experience and to make general sense of their experience. And then the second technique is extracting significant statements. Extracting significant statements that pertain directly to the phenomenon under study. And then the third step is formulating meanings for this significant statement to illuminate hidden meanings. And then you can categorizing the meanings into clusters of themes and confirming consistency between the emerging findings and the participant stories without finding and without giving in to the temptation to ignore data that do not fit. And then the fifth technique is you can integrating the findings into an exhaustive description of the phenomenon under study. And then the sixth technique is you can validating the findings by returning to the study participants to ask how the universal description compares with their personal experience. And then the last techniques is incorporating any change offered by the participants into the final description of the phenomenon. And the next step of this phenomenology research is the technique of drawing the conclusion. The Initial conclusion of this study is still bear faith temporarily and will change if you don't have a strong evidence that supporting the next phase of your data collection. But if an early conclusion of researchers support by the evidence that is valid and consistent when you're returning to the field to collect the data, then the conclusion is credible conclusion. And the conclusion of this research is a new findings that has not previously existed. These findings may change the descriptive or a picture of an object that previously was still dark, so that after investigation it became clear, it can turn a casual relationship or interactive hypothesis or theory. So that's all of my material about the phenomenology research. The next is about the next research will be delivered by my partner Ria Julita. Time is yours.
All right. Thank you for the great presentation, Grecy, and thank you for the opportunity. So this time I would like to continue the next material. It's about grounded theory research. So what is grounded theory research? Grounded theory is a research that concerns with the generation of theory. So grounded theory is a qualitative research method that uses a set of systematic procedures to develop a theory inductively about a phenomenon. This method starts from a statement that is still unclear and finally produce a theory that is collected from various data. And grounded theory make the fact that the gap between theory and practice can be overcome so that it can be applied in practice and improve services. So the next slide, please. Right, the next is about title of research. So our groups find the title of the research about grounded theory research. So the title of our research is Using Grounded Theory to Explore the Role of Parents to Improve Student Learning. So to support our title of research, we have some references that you can see on the screen. Right, the next slide, please. All right, the next is about steps to conducting a data from grounded theory research. So here I have some point or some step to conducting a data. So the first one is determine initial research questions. So in this step, but before I explain about this, I would like to tell you first about the grounded theory used in research. So grounded theory use participant perspective and cyclic process of data collection and analysis to generate focused research question, subsequent data collection method, codes, substantive areas of literature for review, and theories. So to do this grounded theory, we have to do some steps to conducting grounded theory. So the first is determine initial research question. Start off with our initial research question. Have an idea for what phenomenon we are trying to explain. These initial questions will help guide our first step in recruiting and data analysis, but know that the question may evolve as you observe and learn more from the data we collect. So the next step is recruit and collect data, or the other word is about theoretical sampling. With grounded theory, recruiting participant is iterative. Instead of predetermining a specific recruiting criteria ahead of time, we will practice what is called theoretical sampling. So with theoretical sampling, we start with recruiting a small group of participants loosely based on our initial research questions. And then the next step, it's about brief open coding. After we have collected collected some data, such as transcription from interviews, we can begin open coding. And open coding is when we take our transcript and break it into individual excerpts. Then take the excerpts and continuously compare and contrast them with other excerpts. This act of comparison is part of core grounded theory method that's called constant comparative method, which will be used throughout various phases of our analysis. Right, the fourth step is group excerpts into codes. It's open coding. As you make comparison between excerpts of data, look for sets of excerpts that represent the same central idea or concept and group them together. We can use a code to encapsulate these groups of excerpts. Codes are like tags or labels that are assigned to excerpts of text. And the number 5 is group codes into categories or axial coding. As you gradually develop a list of codes that bring together a set of excerpts, you should also begin to also compare codes with other codes. When we find connection between multiple codes, we can group them together into a category. So this step of grounded theory is called axial coding, where we can find the X that connect various codes together. If we are using qualitative data analysis software, these categories are represented by a series of nested codes, which are stacked in a hierarchy. The next slide, please. Right. The next step is analyze more excerpts and compares with codes. All right. In this step, grounded theory is a cyclical process. Even after we have created a list of codes and group codes into categories, we have to continue to analyze additional interviews, transcript, and compare the new excerpt to our existing code categories. The next step is repeat step 2 until 6 until we reach theoretical saturation. With grounded theory, we want to continue until we reach the point where additional transcript excerpts don't expand upon our codes and categories. In other words, if we are learning the same thing over and over again, even with additional excerpts, that means that our codes and categories have become theoretical saturated. The excerpts we have collected so far address all relevant aspects of our codes and categories, and there is no need to pursue further data collection or analysis for our particular codes and categories. The next step is define the central idea or selective coding. With selective coding, we connect all our codes and categories together under one core category. This core category represents the central thesis of our research and is the core idea behind our theory. This core category can be an existing category that we derived earlier, or it can be a new category that we derived from all our existing findings so far. And the last step of our research is write our grounded theory. Once we have determined our core category through selective coding and are confident that we have reached theoretical saturation, it's time to construct our new theory. Gather together our code data and series of memos and use them to describe our new theory. The next slide, please. All right, the next material is about technique of collecting data. So, the technique of collecting data and how to do this technique, I have some idea that I will tell you. Data collection aims to capture a range of contexts, perspectives, and time frames and can include transcript, interview, field notes, memos, elicited text, questionnaires, documents, and scholar literature based on Chalmers 2006. But here I would like to tell you about the technique of collecting the data and how to do this technique in collecting the data in grounded theory, of course. The first step is begin data collection by starting somewhere. For the first set of data we are collect, collect it based on existing domain knowledge or a partial framework, even if we don't know yet whether or not this construct will be relevant to our theory in the end. For example, if we are studying a role of parents at home, we may start by interviewing mother, father, and the students, of course, even if these roles are not what end up being relevant in our final theory. The next, and have an open mind. As we collect the data, we should have an open mind about various theories and categories that can emerge from our data. We should constantly be working to discover relationships between categories we derived from the data. The third technique is don't plan our data collection in advance. Some research studies, especially studies that are intended for hypothesis verification or description, involve a detailed process or defining recruitment criteria and methods for collecting data before going out to collect or analysis data. In theoretical sampling, we don't do that. Instead, we take the initial set of data we collect, analyze it, determine what some emergent categories are, and then decide from these categories where to collect the data next. Our rolling analysis and emergent categories defined in the next step. The next slide, please. All right. The first technique of collecting the data is about recruit based of theoretical purpose and relevance. It's about keep our recruiting criteria flexible and know that our purpose is to generate new theory and not to just verify what we already know. After doing analysis from earlier rounds, we should have an idea of categories that were derived from our data. Look at gaps in those categories and then take note of new questions that emerge. Use these gaps and new questions to guide our criteria for recruitment in the next round of data collection. The last step or the last technique of collecting the data is select comparison groups based on theoretical purpose and relevance. Many research studies, especially those meant for verification or description, may prescribe which set of groups should be compared in analysis. The issue with this approach is that the data we are collect based off these preset criteria may be irrelevant to our emergent theories. In theoretical sampling, we don't decide ahead of time what groups to compare and instead use our data to determine what groups are most relevant for comparison. The next slide, please. All right, the next is about plan the techniques of data analysis. We code the data with using categories and subcategories of meaning and make links, and we use memo writing to document the process. So here I have 3 stages of data analysis in grounded theory. The first is open coding. In open coding, this involves line-by-line coding where concept and key phrases are identified and highlighted and moved into subcategories, then categories. This breaks the data down into conceptual components, and the researchers can start to theorize or reflect on what they are reading and understanding, making sense of data. And the data from each participant will be constantly compared for similarities. The next step is actual coding. At this stage, relationships are identified between the categories and connection identified. So in actual coding, it happens, or this stage happens after we do the first code, that is open coding. And the third involves identifying the core category and methodically relating it to other categories. The relationship must be authenticated and categories refined. Categories are then integrated together and a grounded theory identified. Analytical notes are encouraged. These are notes to oneself to explain thought patterns in relation to the data analysis. The final theory is usually generated from the integration of several analytical memos. The next slide, please. All right, the next slide is the technique of drawing the conclusion in grounded theory. So the way researchers draw conclusion from research result. The first is drawing conclusion from the research objective, preliminary assumption of the research, and research result. From the three elements above, conclusion can be drawn from the result of the study because the three elements above are the core interest of the research. The number two is the conclusion doesn't contain a statistical conclusion. It means that the conclusion of the research result must be data and words of information that describe a research. Information contains a fact that decide the final results of the research. And the number three is conclusion in the form of answers the formulation of the research problem. It means that a research must have a problem formulation. The problem formulation is made to solve the problem in the research, right? So if a research can be answered or completed, then the research can be completed properly. So I think that's all from my explanation. Thank you for your attention. So the next explanation will be continued by my friends, Grecy. Grecy, time.
All right, let's move to the last types of the qualitative research is case study research. So what is case study? Case study is a research strategy and an empirical inquiry that investigates a phenomenon within its real-life context. So in this case study research, we found a title of a research, a case study of Zika in the Brazil. As you can see, we found two references in this research. So, what are the steps to conducting data in this research? First, you must select a case. Once you have developed your problem statement and research question, you should be ready to choose the specific case that you want to focus on. And you should remember, a good case study should have the potential to, the first, provide new or unexpected insights into the subject, and then to challenge or complicate existing assumptions and theories, and last, propose practical course of action to resolve a problem. And then the next steps, build a theoretical framework. While case studies focus more on concrete details than general theories, they should usually have some connection with theory in this field. This way, the case study is not just an isolated description, but is integrated into existing knowledge about the topic. And then the third step is collect the data. There are many different research methods you can use to collect data on your subject. In case studies, tend to focus on qualitative data using methods such as interviews, observation, and analysis of primary and secondary sources, for example, newspaper articles, and photographs, and official records. And then the last steps is describe and analyze the case. In writing up the case study, you need to bring together all the relevant aspects to give as complete a picture as possible of the subject. How you report your findings depends on the type of research you are doing. Some case studies are structured like a standard scientific paper or thesis with separate section or chapters for the method and research and discussion. And then, what are the techniques of collecting the data and how? First, interview. Interview is a process of direct interaction or communication between the interviewer and the respondent. In order for the interview to be effective, there are several stages that must be passed, namely, first, introduce yourself, and next, explaining the purpose of coming, and third, explaining the interview material, and last, asking a question. From the interview, the data collected can be 1. Facts, for example, age, education, occupation, or previous illness. And next, attitudes, for example, attitudes towards building family bridge or health education. And then next, opinions. For example, opinions about health service provided by the health authorities. And the third, desires, such as desired health service. And last, experience. For example, in our case, the experience of the Zika epidemic in Brazil. And for the next technique, you can do an observation. Observation is one of the data collection technique that used to help of the eye sense. Observation is also one of the most common data collection technique in qualitative research method. And observation is essentially an activity using the 5 senses, including sight, smell, hearing, to obtain the information need to answer research problem. And the next is study of documentation. Documentation is one method of collecting a case study by viewing or analyzing document made by subject or himself or by others about the subject. And then the last technique is focus group discussion or FGD. Focus group discussion is a data collection technique that is generally carried out in case study research with the aim of finding the meaning of a theme according to the understanding of a group. And this technique is used to reveal the meaning of a group based on the result of discussions centered on a particular problem. All right, the next topic will be delivered by my partner, Ria Julita. Ria Julita, time is yours.
All right, thank you, Grecy, for the opportunity. So I would like to continue the next explanation. It's about data analysis or technique of data analysis and how to do this. So analyzing case study data is a difficult task because the strategies and techniques have not been well identified. But any research should begin with a general analytical strategy that contains priorities for what to analyze and why. So the first step or technique to do the data analysis is category collection. The researchers looks for a collection of data examples and hopes to find meaning that is relevant to the issues that will arise. And the number two is leaf interpretation. So in this step or technique, the direct interpretation, the case study researchers looks at one example and draw meaning from it without looking for many examples. Number 3, researchers from patterns and look for correspondence between 2 or more categories. So researchers from patterns and look for equivalence between 2 or more categories. And number 4 is researchers develop or compile generalization or can conduct the conclusions. The next slide, please. All right. The next step or the next explanation, it's about the technique of drawing the conclusion. So drawing the conclusion in case study, I have 3 points that can be used when drawing the conclusion. The first one is reiterating research topics and problems. So the explanation of the topic is as short as possible, as well as the reason why the topic is important to discuss. Number 2, summarizing the key points in research. In writing this important point, we are not allowed to copy everything in the research result. Try to re-explain it with a short explanation that gets straight to the point. Each point is enough to be explained in 1 or 2 sentences, and try not to give new finding beyond what is written in the research content sections. And the last is describe the implications and suggestions for further research. Sentences that are made as much as possible should move the reader to carry out further research related to the research result that we have found. The next slide, please. All right. I think that's all from our presentation today. Thank you for your attention, for listening to our presentation. I think that's all. Thank you for your attention once again. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning.